The world does not reward fairness. It never has. It rewards awareness. Most people learn this too late. They enter life believing that honesty guarantees safety, that effort guarantees reward, that skill guarantees recognition. They play by rules they assume are shared. And when the rules change, quietly, without announcement, they are the last to notice. By then, something has already been taken from them. A job they deserved, a relationship they trusted, a reputation they didn't know was fragile. And in that moment, when confusion turns into humiliation, when shock hardens into silence, something splits. Some people collapse there. They internalize the loss. They blame themselves. They shrink. They tell themselves the world is cruel and retreat into smaller lives. Others don't. Others begin watching. They stop reacting and start observing. They replay conversations differently. They notice patterns they once ignored. They recognize that outcomes were never accidental. That power was moving quietly the whole time, shaping events beneath the surface. This is where a different kind of intelligence begins to form. Not academic intelligence, not emotional intelligence, but something colder, sharper, quieter. An intelligence forged through betrayal, restraint, and delayed response. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek approval, and it doesn't rush. It waits. While others argue, it listens. While others vent, it records. While others drown in emotion, it calculates trajectories. This intelligence understands a truth most people resist. Life is not a debate. It's a positioning game. And the ones who survive long enough eventually control the board. But understand this clearly before the descent deepens. This knowledge is not about destruction. It's about immunity. It's not about becoming cruel. It's about becoming unreadable. Because the real danger isn't that people are malicious. It's that they're predictable. And predictability is always exploited. The first shift happens internally. You stop feeling the urge to explain yourself. Not because you're hiding, but because you've learned that explanation is often a form of surrender. Most people think transparency builds trust. In reality, uncontrolled transparency dissolves leverage. Every detail you reveal becomes a handle someone can grip later, sometimes gently, sometimes violently. So you begin practicing something subtle, selective clarity. You answer questions, but not completely. You speak truth, but not totality. You allow gaps. And here's what happens inside those gaps. People project. They fill silence with imagination. They replace absence with assumption. They create stories that feel real to them. And once they believe those stories, they behave accordingly. This is not deception. It's psychological gravity. You've noticed it before, even if you didn't name it. The people who feel most powerful in a room are rarely the ones speaking the most. They don't rush to clarify. They don't chase understanding. They let others lean toward them, trying to decode what hasn't been said. Mystery slows people down, and slowing people down gives you time. Time to assess, time to observe inconsistencies. Time to decide whether someone is safe or merely skilled at appearing harmless. Information, once released, cannot be retrieved. So you begin treating it like currency. You spend it intentionally, never all at once, never to impress, and something subtle changes. Your words carry more weight, not because they're louder, but because they're rarer. When you speak, people listen harder. When you pause, they wonder why. You are no longer predictable. That unpredictability unsettles people who rely on emotional leverage. They don't know where you stand. They can't easily provoke you. They can't rush you into revealing your position. You haven't become secretive. You've become deliberate. And that deliberateness spreads. You realize next that identity itself is fluid. Most people believe authenticity means consistency, that to be real is to behave the same way in every environment. This belief quietly limits them. You begin seeing something different. You notice how people shift naturally already, how tone changes with authority, how posture changes with familiarity, how vocabulary adjusts unconsciously depending on who's listening. You stop resisting this. Instead, You refine it. You learn to speak in the language people already understand, not because you want to please them, but because clarity is a form of power. With analytical minds, you lead with structure. With emotional minds, you lead with resonance. With practical minds, you lead with application. With visionary minds, you lead with direction. You don't change your values, you change your interface, like water, adapting to its container, without ever becoming something else. This makes you dangerous in a quiet way, because people feel seen around you, and when people feel seen, they lower their guard. They tell you what motivates them, what they fear losing, what they're chasing but won't admit out loud. You collect none of this greedily. You simply remember. And slowly, something else fades. Your need. You stop clinging to outcomes, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've learned that attachment clouds perception. The moment you need approval, leverage disappears. The moment you fear loss, manipulation becomes easy. So you practice letting go internally, before life forces you to. You stop fighting to be right. Stop chasing validation. Stop negotiating from desperation. You still pursue goals, but you're no longer owned by them. And paradoxically, people begin treating you differently. Negotiations shift. Respect appears unrequested. Threats lose their force. Because nothing terrifies manipulators more than someone who can walk away calmly. Detachment doesn't make you cold, it makes you clear. From clarity comes patience, and patience unlocks a form of influence most people never experience. You stop pushing, you start positioning, you let silence do work words never could. You allow people to overextend themselves. You wait for moments when they reveal more than intended. Through urgency, insecurity, or haste, your presence alone alters dynamics, not because you dominate, but because you don't rush to fill space. Silence becomes leverage, pauses become pressure, and without raising your voice, without issuing commands, outcomes bend. People offer more, explain more, concede more. They don't realize why, they just feel it. And somewhere along the way, you realize something unsettling. Most people aren't difficult, they're unheard. They repeat themselves louder, sharper, more desperately, not because they want conflict, but because no one has reflected their inner state accurately back to them. So you learn to mirror, not words, but meaning. You hear frustration and reflect desire. You hear anger and reflect fear. You hear exhaustion and reflect unacknowledged effort. People feel understood in your presence. And when someone feels understood, they trust the mirror. That trust gives you access, not to control, but to insight. You understand what drives them before they do. And now, the gray appears. The world stops looking moral and immoral. It starts looking conditional. You see that kindness without boundaries becomes enablement. That honesty without timing becomes sabotage. That purity without pragmatism collapses under real consequences. So you stop asking, does this look good? You start asking, what does this lead to? You measure actions by trajectory, not intention. This doesn't make you ruthless. It makes you responsible, because you no longer hide behind appearances. You choose outcomes and accept their weight. Still, you don't expose everything. You learn restraint. In a world obsessed with broadcasting, you curate absence. You reveal slowly. You allow people to discover you in layers, never all at once. Mystery isn't deception, it's pacing. And finally, something crystallizes. You stop playing games meant to be won emotionally. You care about results, not applause, not dominance, not ego. Results. Arguments become tools or distractions. Effort becomes irrelevant without impact. Plans become disposable when they stop working. You're not loyal to methods. You're loyal to movement. And the strange thing is, life responds. Opportunities come unannounced. People seek your input. Silence surrounds your decisions. Not because you demanded power, but because you became difficult to manipulate. And that, more than dominance, more than control, is the real shift. You didn't learn how to rule others. You learned how not to be ruled. This is where the story doesn't end. It lingers, because once you see this, you can't unsee it. The world has never been fair, not in the way children imagine it should be, not in the way movies promise it will be, not in the way your conscience insists it must be. If you just work hard enough, if you just stay honest enough, if you just keep your hands clean. Reality doesn't reward clean hands. Reality rewards awareness. Because you can be sincere and still be used. You can be talented and still be overlooked. You can do everything right and still watch someone else walk away with what you earned, smiling, unbothered, as if the universe itself signed their permission slip. And that's the moment most people split into two categories. Some people become bitter, loud, reactive. They shout about injustice like shouting could rewrite the laws of gravity. Other people go quiet, not because they've given up, because they've started watching. They notice patterns most people are too emotional to see. They study timing. They keep their face still while their mind takes inventory. They stop assuming the world is a place where truth automatically wins, and they start treating it like what it is, a system, an ecosystem where power moves according to rules no one reads out loud. There's a certain kind of intelligence that forms in that silence, not the kind that makes you charming at parties, not the kind that makes you impressive on paper, a darker kind, the kind that grows from betrayal, humiliation, defeat, moments that teach you the world has teeth. And here's the strange part. The same event that breaks one person sharpens another. Two people can be stabbed with the same knife. One bleeds out emotionally for years. The other learns where knives come from, how hands hide them, and why some smiles arrive a second too early. This isn't about becoming cruel. It's about becoming difficult to fool. Because in a world where people lie with their eyes open, naive goodness is not purity. It's vulnerability. And vulnerability, when it's unguarded, becomes an invitation. So what are we really talking about? We're talking about the psychology of survivors, not survival in the dramatic sense, not warfare, not wilderness, but the quieter kind, the kind happening every day in offices, families, relationships, social circles, negotiations, friendships that aren't quite friendships, love that comes with conditions, loyalty that evaporates when you stop being useful. There are people who live their entire lives inside an invisible game and never realize it's being played. They think their personality is enough. They think their intentions protect them. They think being a good person is a shield. And then they're shocked, always shocked, when someone violates them with a smile. But the people who learn the game, they don't get shocked as often. They still get hurt. They still feel the sting. But they stop being confused. And confusion is what keeps you weak. Confusion is what makes you chase closure from people who benefit from keeping you unsettled. Dark intelligence begins when you stop begging reality to be fair and start learning how unfairness actually operates. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start noticing how certain people speak, not what they say, how they say it. You notice how they enter a room already scanning for leverage. You notice how they never rush to explain themselves, how they don't leak their emotions into the air like perfume, how they can sit inside a tense moment without trying to fix the discomfort. And you wonder, quietly, what do they know that I don't, or worse? What do they know about me that I haven't noticed about myself? Because there's a brutal truth hiding under social politeness. Most people aren't observing you to understand you. They're observing you to predict you. And prediction is control. If someone can reliably predict how you react, how you apologize, how you defend yourself, how you seek approval, how you fold under pressure, then they don't need to dominate you loudly. They can guide you gently, like a hand on the back of your neck. So here's the promise of this narration. Not that you'll become powerful in the shallow, performative sense. Not that you'll become untouchable, but that you'll become harder to play. That you'll recognize the invisible mechanics before they close around your throat. And you'll learn something most people never learn until it's too late. Power doesn't always arrive as aggression. Sometimes it arrives as access. Sometimes it arrives as silence. Sometimes it arrives as someone else's assumption that you're harmless. And one day, if you pay attention, you realize that harmless, and safe are not the same thing. A person can be safe because they're ethical, or harmless because they're blind. The world respects one of those. The world exploits the other. So let's begin where dark intelligence actually begins, with the first trait. Not the flashiest one, but the one that quietly changes how people perceive you, without you ever raising your voice. It's the art of not giving away the whole map. Calculated opacity. Most people hear that phrase and immediately imagine deception. A liar, a manipulator, someone weaving secrets like webs. But calculated opacity is subtler than lying. It's the discipline of selective clarity. It's knowing that telling the whole truth at the wrong time can be just as dangerous as telling a lie. Because information is not just information, it's position. Every detail you reveal about your motives, your fears, your plans, your needs becomes a handle someone else can grab. And human beings love handles. They love leverage. They love the feeling of knowing you, because knowing you makes you smaller. It makes you less mysterious, less unpredictable, easier to categorize, easier to manage. Have you noticed how quickly people try to pin you down? What are you doing next? So what's your plan? Are you seeing anyone? Why did you do that? What do you want? They ask it casually, like friendly curiosity. But psychologically, the question is often doing something else. It's trying to reduce uncertainty, because uncertainty makes people anxious. And anxious people often try to soothe themselves by controlling what they can. Sometimes that means controlling you. Most people answer these questions the way they were trained to answer them. Fully, immediately, eagerly. They mistake transparency for trustworthiness. They think, if I explain myself, they'll understand me. But understanding isn't always what people do with your explanations. Sometimes they use them as ammunition. Sometimes they use them as a script. Sometimes they use them to push you into predictable roles. Calculated opacity is a decision to stop over-explaining, to stop narrating your soul to anyone who asks, to understand that mystery, controlled mystery, creates weight. You've felt this before? Think about the people who pull attention without chasing it. They don't reveal everything in one breath. They don't hand out their inner world like free samples. They answer a question, and somehow the answer makes you more curious instead of less. Not because they're playing games, because they're leaving space. And space is powerful. Space is where other people project their imagination. And imagination is not neutral. Imagination creates stories. Stories create expectations. Expectations shape behavior. If people don't know exactly what you're thinking, they start guessing. And those guesses often reveal more about them than about you. That's one of the hidden benefits of calculated opacity. It turns other people into informants, not because they're telling you secrets directly, but because their assumptions expose their mental patterns, their fears, their hopes, their biases. You learn what they want you to be, and what people want you to be is often what they can control. So how does this look in real life? It looks like answering without spilling. It looks like giving the necessary information, not the emotional autobiography. Someone asks, "What are you doing this weekend?" Most people, "Oh, nothing much. Probably just relaxing, maybe a movie. I'm kind of tired. I've had a long week." That's not conversation. That's leakage. A soft, nervous habit of filling silence with self-disclosure, as if your comfort depends on being understood. Calculated opacity sounds like, "I've got something I need to take care of." And then you stop. Notice what happens in the listener's mind. Their brain reaches for a story. Something important? What kind of something? Are they okay? Is it work? Family? A secret project? And now you've done something subtle. You've shifted the attention, not to details about your life, but to the possibility that your life contains depth they haven't accessed. And that possibility changes how they treat you. Because people treat mystery with caution. They treat predictability with entitlement. There's a reason people feel comfortable disrespecting those who overshare. Oversharing signals that your boundaries are porous. and porous boundaries are an unspoken invitation. Take what you want. I'll explain it away. Calculated opacity is not coldness. It's self-respect made visible through restraint, and restraint is rare. Most people don't have it. Most people talk themselves into weakness. They argue their position instead of holding it. They plead for understanding instead of letting their actions speak. They confess their insecurities as a way to bond, without realizing they're handing someone a weapon. So let's make this practical. There are 3 levels of information you carry. What's public? What's private? What's strategic? Public is what anyone can know without risk. Private is what only trusted people earn through time. Strategic is what even trusted people don't automatically get, because timing matters. The mistake most people make is they treat strategic information as private information. They assume that if someone feels close, that person deserves full access. But closeness doesn't always mean safety. Sometimes closeness is the disguise danger wears best. Calculated opacity is the ability to keep strategic information strategic, even when you're emotional, even when you're excited, even when you're pressured, especially then, because pressure is often a test. When someone presses you for details, sometimes they're not curious. They're checking your boundary strength. They're checking how easily you fold. And every time you fold, you teach them a lesson. If I push, they give. If you want to see someone's true nature, don't watch how they treat you when you agree. Watch how they treat you when you don't explain yourself. A calm, I'll handle it, reveals more about their character than 1,000 friendly conversations. Now, there's a shadow side here. If you take calculated opacity too far, you become unreachable. Not mysterious, just distant. People stop trusting you, not because you're evil, but because you feel like a locked door with no handle. So the skill is balance. Reveal enough to remain human. Hold enough to remain sovereign. Because once you learn this, something strange happens. Your words become scarce, and scarce things gain value. When you speak less, your voice becomes heavier. People listen differently. They lean in. They wonder what you're not saying, and what you're not saying becomes part of your presence. Now, if calculated opacity is about controlling how much of you people can access, the second trait is about controlling which version of you they access. Adaptive persona. This is where people get uncomfortable. They hear persona and they think fake. They imagine someone wearing masks, changing faces, manipulating rooms. But adaptive persona is older than manipulation. It's intelligence. Because the same message delivered in the same tone does not land the same way on every nervous system. Different people have different emotional languages. And if you keep speaking your language to everyone, you will be misunderstood. Not because you're wrong, but because you're refusing to translate. Most people treat communication like self-expression. They think speaking is about being seen, so they speak to be heard, not to be received. And then they're shocked when people don't get it. Adaptive persona begins when you accept a quiet truth. Being understood is not automatic. It's engineered. You already do this unconsciously. You don't talk to a child the way you talk to a colleague. You don't talk to a grieving friend the way you talk to a competitor. You don't talk to a nervous stranger the way you talk to someone you love. You shift. You soften. You sharpen. You simplify. You expand. You adjust your speed, your vocabulary, your posture, your humor. That's not deception. That's social intelligence. Adaptive persona is when you do it consciously, not to exploit, but to be effective. Because effectiveness is often the difference between influence and frustration. Imagine you're trying to persuade someone, not trick them, persuade them. If they're analytical, they need structure, logic, evidence, clear steps. If they're emotionally driven, they need resonance, feeling, human stakes. If they're practical, they need application, how it works, what it changes. If they're status sensitive, they need recognition, respect, social framing. Most people ignore this and just speak. They throw words like darts in the dark and hope something hits. Adaptive persona is turning on the lights. It's watching the person in front of you and asking, what kind of mind is this? What kind of fear lives here? What kind of respect do they respond to? What kind of story do they believe about themselves? Because everyone is living inside a story. And if you speak outside their story, you sound like noise. But if you speak inside their story, even for a moment, you become meaningful. There's a metaphor for this that never gets old. Water. Water doesn't argue with the shape of the container. It becomes what the container can hold, but it doesn't stop being water. That's the key. Adaptive persona is not becoming a different person at your core. It's becoming a different interface. Your values stay stable. Your ethics stay intact. Your center stays yours, but your expression becomes flexible. And flexibility is not weakness. Rigidity is weakness. Rigid things break. Flexible things survive. Now, this trait has a danger too. Some people adapt so much they disappear. They become mirrors with no face. They become liked, but not known. Trusted, but not respected. They lose the ability to tell where their persona ends and their self begins. That's not intelligence. That's emotional homelessness. So the rule is this: adapt your delivery. Never adapt your identity. Your values are your spine. Your persona is your clothing. Change clothing as needed. Do not remove your spine. And when you start practicing this, you'll notice something unsettling. People will begin to tell you things they don't tell others. Not because you begged, because they feel, often unconsciously, that you can hold their inner world without judging it. You're speaking in a way their nervous system recognizes as safe, and safety makes people reveal themselves. And what people reveal becomes information, and information becomes advantage. Not advantage to harm them, advantage to understand the terrain you're walking on, because the world is terrain, and most people wander it like sleepwalkers. Now, if calculated opacity protects your narrative, an adaptive persona helps you move through social terrain. The third trait is the one that makes you almost impossible to manipulate: detachment. This word gets misunderstood so badly, it's almost tragic. People hear detachment and think cold, numb, uncaring. But real detachment is not numbness. It's freedom. It's the ability to care without being owned by what you care about. Most people are owned. Owned by approval, owned by romance, owned by their reputation, owned by their fear of being alone, owned by the image they've built, and the constant anxiety that someone might tear it down. And because they're owned, they can be threatened. Not always openly, sometimes subtly. A disappointed look, a withdrawal of affection, a hint that they might be excluded, a suggestion that they might be replaced, and suddenly they're bargaining, apologizing when they did nothing wrong, explaining themselves to people who don't deserve explanations, performing emotional labor to maintain peace that was never truly peaceful. Detachment is the moment you realize, if I'm terrified to lose it, then it's already controlling me. If someone can take something away and use that possibility to shape my behavior, then I'm not in a relationship. I'm in a leash. Detachment cuts the leash, not by becoming indifferent, but by becoming internally anchored. You still love, you still want, you still build, but you stop needing any external thing so desperately that it makes you betray yourself. This changes everything, because desperation is visible. You can smell it on people. Desperation makes you negotiate from your knees, and the world responds to kneeling with either pity or exploitation. Detachment makes you stand, even when you're afraid, especially when you're afraid. Think of two people negotiating the same deal. One person needs the deal. Their rent depends on it. Their ego depends on it. Their identity depends on it. The other person would like the deal, but can walk away. Same deal. Completely different power. Why? Because the second person isn't being held hostage by the outcome. Detachment gives you clarity, because emotional hunger warps perception. When you're starving for approval, you interpret crumbs as love. When you're starving for security, you interpret control as safety. When you're starving for connection, You interpret attention as intimacy. Detachment doesn't remove your needs. It removes the blindness your needs can create. And here's the paradox that makes detachment feel almost supernatural. The less you chase, the more you attract. Because chasing signals lack, and lack signals value scarcity in yourself. Detachment signals abundance. Not necessarily external abundance, but internal abundance. It signals, I can survive without you. And people treat survivors differently than they treat beggars. This is why confident people feel magnetic, not because they're perfect, but because they don't collapse when you don't choose them. They don't bargain with reality. They adjust. They move. They keep their dignity. Now, there's a darker truth inside detachment, a truth most people avoid because it sounds too sharp. You cannot be fully manipulated by someone if you're willing to lose them. You can be hurt, yes. You can grieve, but you cannot be controlled. And control is what most manipulators actually want. They don't want your happiness. They want your predictability. So detachment is refusing to be predictable through fear. It's practicing a calm readiness to walk away from what violates your values, even if it costs you comfort. And that readiness changes your posture, your voice, your eyes. People sense it. You don't have to announce it. Detachment announces itself. It's in how you don't rush to fix, how you don't beg for reassurance, how you don't overreact when someone tries to provoke you. And if you're wondering whether you have detachment, ask yourself one question. When something feels like it's slipping away, do you become more yourself or less? Do you hold your center or do you start performing? Most people perform. They call it love. They call it loyalty. They call it trying. But often it's just fear wearing a costume. Detachment removes the costume. And now we arrive at something quieter, but heavier. The fourth trait, silent leverage. This is where dark intelligence starts to feel like gravity. Because most people think power is loud. They imagine dominance, demands, threats, big personalities filling rooms. But loud power is usually insecure power. It needs constant reinforcement. Real power doesn't need a shout because it's already positioned. Silent leverage is influence that exists before you speak. It's the ability to shift a room's temperature with your presence, not through intimidation, through weight, through timing, through the way you don't rush. Most people are uncomfortable with silence. Silence feels like exposure, so they fill it. They talk too much. They confess too much. They argue too quickly. They answer before they've thought. And every time they feel silence, they reveal something. A bias, a weakness, a motive, a desire. Silent leverage is letting other people leak while you remain contained. There's a moment in conversation, an awkward, fragile moment, after someone asks a question. Most people answer immediately as if speed equals competence, but speed often equals anxiety. Try this instead. Pause, just a few seconds. Look at them like you're actually considering what they asked. Let the silence stretch long enough that they feel it, and then answer. Your answer doesn't even need to be brilliant. The pause makes it feel deliberate. It makes it feel heavier. It forces the other person to receive you differently because you've taken control of rhythm. And rhythm is control. Silent leverage also comes from having options you never announce. The person who needs to threaten is usually the person with fewer choices. The person with choices doesn't have to threaten. Their calm is the threat, not a threat of harm, a threat of absence, a threat of leaving the negotiation, a threat of not needing the deal. Not needing is leverage. And this applies to relationships too, in a way that's almost painful to admit. If someone knows you will stay no matter how they treat you, they will eventually test how much you can endure, not always out of cruelty, sometimes out of unconscious curiosity, sometimes out of their own unresolved wounds. But they will test, because humans test boundaries the way children test doors. And if the door never closes, they stop respecting what's inside. Silent leverage is closing the door without slamming it. It's becoming the kind of person who can be generous, but cannot be taken for granted. You don't demand. Loyalty. You become valuable enough that loyalty becomes rational. You don't ask for respect. You behave in a way that makes disrespect feel risky. And no, this isn't about fear. It's about consequences. All stable systems are built on consequences, even love, especially love. If love has no consequences, it becomes permissive. Permissive love feels kind until it destroys both people. Silent leverage is patient. It doesn't chase immediate victories. It invests in long-term positioning. Most people want instant results, instant validation, instant proof that they matter. Silent leverage doesn't need proof. It knows. It plants seeds and waits. And while waiting, it watches. Because one of the strangest things about humans is this. People reveal themselves most clearly when they think nothing is happening, when they think you're not reacting, when they think you're not paying attention, and then they slip. They say something careless. They show a crack. They reveal a motive. They admit a fear. Silent leverage is being present enough to notice the slip and contained enough not to react to it, because reaction is what resets the game. Reaction is what tells people what worked. If they provoke you and you explode, they've learned your button. If they guilt you and you fold, they've learned your weakness. If they withhold affection and you panic, they've learned your dependency. Silent leverage is making your buttons hard to find. And now, once you can hold information, adapt expression, detach from fear, and use silence as gravity, you become capable of a fifth trait, psychological echo. This one feels almost like mind reading, but it isn't supernatural. It's attention. It's the ability to hear what people are saying and what they're trying not to say, because everyone is speaking on two levels, the surface and the subtext. Most people only listen to the surface, so they respond to words, but the real conversation is happening underneath. The emotion behind the complaint, the need behind the anger, the insecurity behind the arrogance, the longing behind the joke. Psychological echo is when you reflect the subtext back to someone, gently, so they feel seen. And when someone feels seen, their defenses drop, not because you hypnotized them, because you gave them what they've been starving for. Most people are starving to be understood, not praised, understood. There's a difference. Praise feels good, but it doesn't touch the loneliness. Understanding touches the loneliness. And once you touch that, you hold influence, not the crude influence of manipulation, the deeper influence of resonance. Think about the last time someone truly understood you, not just agreed with you, understood you. How did that change your trust in them? How did that change how much weight their words carried? That's psychological echo. It starts with a simple shift. Stop listening to respond. Start listening to map. When someone talks, ask yourself, what are they protecting? What are they afraid of? What do they need to believe about themselves? What are they trying to get without admitting they want it? Because people rarely tell you their real needs directly. They disguise them as complaints, opinions, principles. Someone says, I hate my job. Surface response, you should find a new one. Echo response, it sounds like you've been feeling undervalued, like you're doing more than people recognize. Now the person pauses, because you touched something true, and truth makes people still. Someone says, people are so fake. Surface response, yeah, totally. Echo response, it sounds like you've been disappointed by someone you trusted, and now you're trying not to feel that again. Now you're inside the real conversation, and inside the real conversation, people reveal the real levers. There are 3 silent questions almost everyone is asking constantly, even if they never admit it. Do you see me? Do you understand me? Do I matter to you? Most people answer these questions accidentally. Dark intelligence answers them deliberately, not through flattery, through precision, through saying the thing that makes the other person feel, this person gets it. And once you can do that, you can also do something else. You can frame your ideas in the language of their needs, not by changing your idea, by changing the doorway through which it enters their mind. Some people are driven by security, some by status, some by freedom, some by belonging, some by meaning. Same proposal, different framing. To the security-driven mind, this reduces risk. To the status-driven mind, this elevates your position. To the freedom-driven mind, this increases options. To the belonging-driven mind, this strengthens the team. To the meaning-driven mind, this aligns with what matters. If you don't do this, you will be ignored by people who could have been allies. And here's the unnerving part. Manipulative people already do this. They do it to extract. If you learn it ethically, you can do it to protect your boundaries, your relationships, your decisions. Because if you don't understand the levers, someone else will pull them. Now, psychological echo leads us into territory that makes people nervous. Because once you start seeing the mechanics, you realize something uncomfortable. The world is not purely moral, it's complex. And complex systems force complex decisions. This is where the sixth trait appears, ambiguous morality. That phrase sounds dangerous for a reason, so let's handle it with care. Ambiguous morality does not mean no morals. It does not mean cruelty. It does not mean harming people to get ahead. It means accepting that real life rarely offers clean choices. Sometimes the nice choice enables someone's worst behavior. Sometimes the honest choice is weaponized by someone who isn't honest. Sometimes the peaceful choice is just avoidance that lets a problem rot until it becomes infection. Ambiguous morality is pragmatic ethics. It's asking, what action creates the least harm and the most stability over time? Not what action makes me look like a good person in the moment. Not what action keeps me comfortable over time. Because time reveals consequences, and consequences are where morality lives. Here's an example that cuts through the fog. You're in a leadership role, and someone on your team is charming but dishonest. They lie to clients. They shift blame. They create chaos and then pretend to be the solution. The nice move is another chance. The compassionate move is patience. But what about the honest team members watching their integrity become a disadvantage? What about the clients being misled? What about the culture you're building? Ambiguous morality is the willingness to do what feels harsh in the short term to prevent wider damage in the long term. Not because you lack empathy, because you can see beyond the moment or take something more personal. A friend is in a relationship that is slowly draining them. They keep making excuses. They keep romanticizing the pain. They keep calling it love. The supportive move is nodding gently. But sometimes support is cowardice disguised as kindness. Ambiguous morality is telling the truth that risks being disliked because the cost of silence is higher. It's not gray because you're lost. It's gray because life is layered. But this trait is also the easiest one to corrupt because anyone can claim pragmatism to justify selfishness. So there has to be a boundary, a line you do not cross, a set of non-negotiables. If you don't have those, ambiguous morality turns into moral drift, and moral drift turns into becoming the very thing you feared. So here's a rule to keep it clean. You can be strategic without being predatory. If your strategy depends on breaking others to build yourself, that's not intelligence, that's hunger, and hunger is never satisfied. Now, if you hold strategic ambiguity without losing your ethics, you start to understand the seventh trait, controlled exposure. And at first it sounds similar to calculated opacity, but it's different. Calculated opacity is about intentions. Controlled exposure is about identity. It's about how much of your inner world you reveal and when. Because the modern world has a strange religion, oversharing. People expose themselves constantly, opinions, emotions, secrets, insecurities, broadcasted like proof of authenticity. But exposure is not authenticity. Exposure is just exposure. And the more exposed you are, the easier you are to read. The easier you are to read, the easier you are to predict. The easier you are to predict, the easier you are to steer. Controlled exposure is the choice to remain partially unreadable, not because you're hiding something shameful, because you understand something most people forget. Once information leaves you, it doesn't belong to you anymore. It belongs to the imagination of whoever received it. And imagination reshapes. It distorts. It exaggerates. It tells stories. A detail you share innocently can become a label someone uses to shrink you. A vulnerability you reveal in trust can become the exact pressure point someone uses when they're angry. Controlled exposure says, trust is earned in time, not demanded in conversation. It means you don't give strangers your full psychological blueprint. You let people earn access. You let relationships unfold instead of spilling your entire story on the first night because the silence feels uncomfortable. And when you do reveal something personal, you pay attention to timing, because timing changes meaning. The same detail said too early sounds like insecurity. Said at the right moment, it sounds like depth. Said too late, it sounds like concealment. This isn't paranoia. It's respect for reality, because the world contains both safe and unsafe people, and the difference between them is not always obvious at first glance. Unsafe people often look warm. Safe people are sometimes quiet. Controlled exposure gives you time to see which is which. And now we reach the 8th trait, the one that ties everything together like a knot: outcome obsession. This is where dark intelligence becomes unmistakably practical, because a lot of people love the feeling of strategy. They love sounding smart. They love debating, analyzing, predicting. But they don't love outcomes. They love ego. Outcome obsession is different. It doesn't care who looks right. It cares what works. Most people get trapped in symbolic victories, winning arguments, being perceived as morally superior, maintaining an image, proving a point, and they lose the real war while celebrating a tiny battle. Outcome-obsessed people ask a question that slices through drama. What result do I actually want here? Not what do I want to say. Not what do I want them to think. What result? Because results are reality's language. And if you can't speak results, you're just performing intelligence. Outcome obsession changes how you handle conflict. If your goal is to change behavior, humiliating someone rarely works. If your goal is peace, being right might be irrelevant. If your goal is information, arguing is poison. Outcome obsession makes you choose your method based on the destination, not your emotions. It also makes you terrifyingly efficient, because you stop doing busy things that make you feel productive and start doing the small number of things that actually move the needle. You stop worshiping effort. You start respecting effect. And this is where the descent deepens. Because when you become outcome obsessed, you start noticing how many people are addicted to games that don't matter. They stir conflict because conflict gives them identity. They sabotage progress because progress threatens their role. They demand attention because attention is the only proof they exist. Outcome obsession makes you immune to that, and immunity changes your life, because you stop being pulled into other people's storms. You stop being used as emotional furniture. You stop being a stage where someone else performs their chaos. You become still, directed, hard to derail. Now, if you're listening carefully, you might feel something unsettling happening, a shift. Because these 8 traits don't just teach you how to navigate the world, they teach you something darker, how the world has been navigating you. And once you see that, you start remembering moments. A conversation where someone demanded explanations and you gave them. A relationship where your fear of losing someone made you betray your own boundaries. A workplace where your talent wasn't enough because you didn't manage perception. A friend who mirrored your pain to gain trust and then used your vulnerability later. And you realize this isn't theoretical. This has already happened to you, which raises the question that most people avoid because it feels too heavy. If these traits exist, then who around you is already using them? And are they using them ethically? Or are they using them like a predator uses camouflage? Because here's the truth. No one likes to say out loud. There are people who study human psychology for compassion, And there are people who study human psychology for control. The behaviors can look similar on the surface. The difference is intention. The difference is conscience. The difference is what they do when they have power. And this is why the most important part of dark intelligence isn't the techniques. It's the inner compass. Because without an inner compass, strategy becomes an excuse. Without an inner compass, detachment becomes cruelty. Opacity becomes deceit. Adaptation becomes a mask that never comes off. Silent leverage becomes domination. Psychological echo becomes manipulation. And outcome obsession becomes a machine that crushes everything human in its path. So the real question isn't whether you can learn these traits. You can. You already have pieces of them inside you. The real question is, what kind of person will you become as they sharpen? Someone who can't be manipulated? Or someone who can't feel? Someone who understands the game? Or someone who becomes the game? Because the most dangerous transformations don't happen loudly. They happen quietly. They happen in the small decisions you justify to yourself. The first time you withhold a truth to avoid discomfort. The first time you mirror someone's pain to gain trust. The first time you choose an outcome over a principle and call it necessary. And then you wake up one day and realize you've been slowly rewritten. Not by the world, by your own adaptations. So if you want to walk this path without losing your humanity, you need one more layer. One most people skip. Not a trait. A rule. A psychological safeguard. Here it is. Never use insight to remove another person's agency. Use insight to remove your own blindness. That's the line. That's what keeps you from becoming what hurts you. Because if your intelligence exists to dominate, it will rot you from the inside. But if your intelligence exists to protect, to see clearly, to make choices without being emotionally hijacked, it becomes something rare. A calm kind of power. The kind that doesn't need permission. The kind that doesn't need applause. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself. Now look back at the beginning. The world never plays fair. That sentence can make you bitter or awake. The bitter person keeps demanding fairness from a universe that doesn't negotiate. The awake person learns the rules, builds defenses, and moves through life with their eyes open. And once your eyes are open, a new question appears, quietly, like a shadow at the edge of the room. If you stopped explaining yourself, if you stopped reacting emotionally, if you stopped giving people easy access to your mind, if you started moving with restraint and timing, who would still be close to you? Who would still treat you the same? And who, suddenly, would get uncomfortable? Because discomfort reveals dependence, and dependence reveals intention. Some people only like you when you are available. Some people only love you when you are predictable. Some people only respect you when you are useful. And some people only feel safe when you are smaller than them. Dark intelligence doesn't just teach you to win. It teaches you to see. And seeing is the beginning of every real escape. Because you can't leave a cage you don't recognize as a cage. And the deepest cages aren't made of steel. They're made of guilt, neediness, approval addiction, the fear of being misunderstood, the fear of being alone, the fear of being seen as the villain in someone else's story. So here's where the descent continues. Not into cruelty, into clarity, into the private mechanics of how influence actually works. Because once you understand these mechanics, you can do something most people never learn to do. You can choose your response instead of being chosen by your triggers. And that choice, quiet, invisible, internal, is where real power begins. And if you're still here, listening to the second conversation, the one beneath the words, then you already know something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. It isn't just the world that isn't fair. It's the fact that you have been negotiating blind, not because you're stupid, not because you're weak, but because you were trained, like most people, to confuse goodness with exposure, and honesty with safety, and effort with inevitable reward. And when reality didn't match the promise, you called it bad luck. But it wasn't luck. It was mechanics. Here's the part that stings when it finally lands. The game doesn't start when someone attacks you. The game starts when someone studies you. They study what you tolerate. They study what you explain. They study how quickly you forgive, how fast you react, how desperately you try to be understood. Because the easiest person to control is the person who thinks control only looks like aggression. But control is rarely aggressive. Control is often polite. Control smiles. Control asks questions that feel like curiosity. Control uses your decency like a key. Control waits for your emotional reflexes, because reflexes are predictable, and predictability is leverage. So if you felt that quiet dread before, after a conversation that seemed normal, but somehow left you smaller, if you've ever walked away thinking, why do I feel like I just gave something away? That was your nervous system telling you the truth your mind didn't have words for yet. You were being read. And once you're read, you can be steered. But here's the twist. Once you can see it, you can stop it. That's what this is about. Not becoming cruel, not becoming paranoid, not becoming the kind of person who turns every room into a battlefield. This is about becoming conscious, because consciousness is the only real exit from manipulation. Most people think freedom means doing what you want. Real freedom is simpler and harder. Freedom is not being moved by what you didn't choose, not being yanked by guilt, not being baited by provocation, not being rushed by urgency that isn't yours, not being cornered into explanations that turn your boundaries into apologies. The moment you stop being pulled, the game changes, and the world notices, because the world is full of people who rely on one thing to stay powerful: your automatic responses. They need you to react fast. They need you to feel responsible for their feelings. They need you to panic when they withdraw affection. They need you to chase closure when they create confusion. They need you to overshare to prove you're real. They need you to keep performing honesty, like it's a moral tax you owe every stranger who asks for details. And the moment you stop doing that, something becomes visible. Who benefits from your openness? Who benefits from your urgency? Who benefits from your need to be liked? Because when you become harder to read, the wrong people don't become angry first. They become uncomfortable. And discomfort is information. Discomfort is the body language of someone who just lost access. So let's bring this down to a human level, because this isn't theory. Imagine a person, maybe it's you, maybe it's someone you love, who keeps getting unlucky with people. The same pattern, different faces. They meet someone, they give warmth, they give trust, they give honesty, and then suddenly they're apologizing for things they didn't do, explaining themselves to someone who refuses to understand, shrinking to keep peace, walking on eggshells to avoid consequences they can't predict. And one day, they wake up and realize, I'm not in a relationship. I'm in a system where I keep paying, and the cost keeps going up. That person doesn't need more positivity. They don't need another motivational quote. They need awareness. They need the ability to hear the second conversation. And now, you're hearing the second conversation, not because you became paranoid, not because you stopped believing in people, but because you stopped donating your inner world to anyone who asked nicely. This is what no one tells you about waking up. It doesn't feel like enlightenment. It feels like grief, because you begin mourning a version of yourself that was simpler, a version that believed effort was always rewarded, a version that thought being good was enough to be safe. And for a while, that grief can make you dangerous in the wrong direction. You start seeing patterns everywhere. You start reading every smile like a threat. You start treating every question like a trap. But that's not intelligence. That's injury pretending to be wisdom. Real dark intelligence isn't suspicion. It's discernment. It's knowing the difference between a safe person and a charming person, between closeness and access, between love and control wearing perfume. And the deeper you go, the clearer the line becomes. The goal was never to dominate anyone. The goal was to stop being dominated by your own triggers, because that's how most people get controlled. Not through force, through urgency, through guilt, through the fear of being misunderstood, through the addiction to fixing the tension. You learn to pause, to breathe, to keep your center. And once you can keep your center, you become something rare, Not loud, not ruthless, not cold, just unhookable. And that's the moment the world negotiates with you differently. People who used to press you for explanations start getting less. People who relied on your predictability start getting nervous. People who only loved you when you were easy, start revealing themselves. And that's not tragedy. That's filtering. Because awareness doesn't just protect you from enemies. It reveals your environment. It shows you who respects you and who simply benefited from your innocence. So if you're listening to this and something inside you feels exposed, good. Not because you're weak, because your nervous system is recognizing truth, and truth always has a cost. It costs you the comfort of being asleep, but it gives you something better, choice. You don't have to react. You don't have to explain. You don't have to prove your goodness to people who secretly want your permission to use you. You can watch. You can wait. You can walk away. And if you can do that, then the game changes. Not because you became a monster, but because you stopped offering yourself as food. So here's my question for you. What was the moment that forced your eyes open? Was it betrayal, humiliation, a quiet realization that someone you trusted was studying you, not to understand you, but to predict you? Drop it in the comments. I read them, because patterns live there. And if this hit something real in you, follow the channel, like the video so it reaches the people who are still confused inside the cage, and share it with someone who keeps blaming themselves for a world that was never designed to be fair, because bitterness is a prison, but awareness is a door, and once you see the second conversation, you don't go back.